The public imagination is fixated on kinetic hardware, hypersonic glide vehicles, carrier strike groups. This is a deliberate misdirection. The primary vector for strategic defeat is not a missile launch, it is silence. A superpower's solvency is not measured in warheads, but in data packets. Trillions of bytes per second flow through two irreplaceable channels: undersea fiber optic cables and low Earth orbit satellite constellations. One deep, one high. These are the central nervous system of global finance, logistics, and command and control. Severing these vectors creates a blind leviathan, a state that retains immense kinetic power, its nuclear arsenal, but has lost all situational awareness. It cannot track assets, communicate with fleets, or distinguish a tactical probe from a full-scale decapitation strike. This state of induced paranoia is the objective. This is not theoretical, it is operational doctrine. CSIS analysts document how Ukraine's systematized drone warfare has neutralized high-value Russian assets at a fraction of the kinetic cost. Simultaneously, Poland reports repelling a major Russian-attributed cyber attack on its power grid. These are not isolated events. They are systemic probes, mapping the vulnerabilities required to trigger a communications blackout. When a state is blinded, its launch-on warning protocols shift from a deterrent to its only perceived guarantee of survival. The asymmetric threat is not the drone that hits a tank. It is the silent vector that cuts a cable, blinds a satellite, and corners a nuclear power into a final, irreversible decision. Perceived weakness, engineered by 1,000 low-cost cuts, is now the primary accelerant for global thermonuclear conflict. Forget the flag waving. Modern warfare is a solvency crisis. A nation-state operates from a balance sheet. On one side, kinetic assets, tanks, aircraft, warships. On the other, liabilities, economic sanctions, domestic unrest, and the political cost of an unpopular war. The primary motive for pivoting to asymmetric warfare is not strength. It is a desperate measure to manage a terminal domestic liability. According to USI analysis, a protracted, high-casualty conventional war becomes an existential threat to the regime itself. The political and economic costs exceed the state's ability to pay. The war becomes insolvent. This insolvency is accelerated when conventional assets are systematically neutralized by low-cost threats. The drone war in Ukraine provides the blueprint. As documented by Eurasia Review, the systematized use of FPV drones turns multi-million-dollar armor into battlefield scrap at a 1,000-to-1 cost ratio. This isn't just attrition, it is an economic demolition of a superpower's core military leverage. Weakness forces the pivot. Unable to afford a kinetic victory, the state shifts its strategy to asymmetric attacks that offer the highest leverage for the lowest cost. This is the logic behind the alleged Russian cyber attacks on Polish power grids, a non-kinetic strike to impose massive economic and psychological cost. It is the same protocol behind China's reported plan to deploy WiDi for Taiwan information operations in Japan, fracturing an alliance without firing a shot. This pivot is the most dangerous phase. It is an admission of conventional weakness. When these low-cost asymmetric probes also fail to secure strategic victory, the balance sheet leaves only one remaining asset with which to enforce its will and avoid total collapse. This engineered weakness is the primary accelerant toward that final vertical escalation. The solvency of a conventional superpower is no longer measured in carrier groups, but in its burn rate against low-cost threats. The Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, quantifies this new battlefield calculus. A single $5 million main battle tank is now a kinetic liability against a $500 first-person view drone. This is not a tactical problem. It is a systemic economic crisis. The cost-to-kill ratio has inverted by a factor of 10,000 to 1. This is the democratization of violence in its purest mathematical form. The barrier to entry for inflicting strategic-level attrition has collapsed. State-level lethality is now available at a commercial price point. The drone war in Ukraine, which evolved from improvisation to systematized combat, provides the blueprint. This economic model extends beyond physical assets. Cyber operations, like the attacks attributed to Russia against Poland's power grid, achieve massive infrastructure disruption for negligible capital outlay. A superpower is being rendered insolvent, one low-cost cut at a time. The question of where the next conflict occurs is a misdirection. The systemic battlefield is not a geographic location. It is a complex of interconnected networks, power grids, financial systems, and cognitive space. These are the gray zones, the true theaters of operation where strategic solvency is attacked. Examine the recent cyber attack on Poland's power grid, attributed by Warsaw to Russian actors. This was not a declaration of war. It was a low kinetic cost probe of NATO's Article 5 threshold. It is a data point collected in a live environment to measure response times and systemic fragility at near-zero risk. Simultaneously, in the Pacific, the vector is informational. Reports confirm China's blueprint to saturate Japanese social media with a wide eye for Taiwan narrative during a crisis. This is asymmetric warfare targeting an alliance's political will. It neutralizes trillions in military hardware by collapsing the consensus required to deploy it. These tactics are not theoretical. They are being perfected in proxy laboratories. The drone war in Ukraine has evolved from battlefield improvisation to a systematized combat doctrine. According to RUSI analysis, this blueprint for low-cost, high-impact attrition is now a primary export to other actors seeking to challenge conventional powers. Therefore, incidents of regional instability, from travel warnings for South Africa to port strikes in Canada, must be recontextualized. CSIS reports assess these are no longer isolated domestic issues. They are potential staging grounds to test supply chain disruption, exploit social fractures, and measure a superpower's logistical overextension. They are symptoms of a wider campaign. The mathematical certainty is this: each successful gray zone operation erodes a superpower's conventional leverage. Each power grid flicker, each fractured alliance, each disrupted supply chain is a calculated step toward strategic insolvency. When a state's ability to project power through conventional means is neutralized asymmetrically, its launch-on-warning posture defaults to its final lever, the nuclear threshold. The gray zone is the primary accelerant for global thermonuclear conflict. The launch-on-warning doctrine is not a choice. It is a protocol. It dictates that if a nation's early warning systems detect an incoming nuclear strike, it must launch its own retaliatory strike before the inbound warheads can eliminate its capacity to respond. This is the bedrock of deterrence, the mathematical certainty of mutually assured destruction. It was designed for an analog world of radar and satellite confirmations. Enter the fog of digital war. A cyber attack is the primary asymmetric vector to neutralize this protocol. We have observed state-level actors targeting critical infrastructure. Reports confirm Poland recently repelled a major cyber attack on its power grid, attributed to Russian sources. Extrapolate this tactic to a nation's nuclear command, control, and communications. A hostile actor does not need to fire a missile to trigger a launch. They only need to blind the system. When the radar screens go dark, the commander faces a systemic solvency crisis. The data is gone. Is it a system malfunction, or is it a deliberate hostile blackout, the prelude to a decapitation strike? According to CSIS analysis, the protocol's logic is unforgiving. Waiting for confirmation risks 100% destruction of your assets. The kinetic cost of inaction is absolute strategic defeat. In the digital fog, the doctrine compels a launch based on the absence of data. The fear of being disarmed by a silent digital strike becomes the trigger. This is the new accelerant. Perceived weakness, engineered by a cyber attack, forces the final kinetic escalation. Before triggering a systemic solvency crisis, an adversary must first calibrate the target's response protocols. CSIS analysis confirms the drone war in Ukraine has now systematized low-cost kinetic strikes, while the attempted cyber attack on Poland's power grid provides the digital blueprint. The next vector is not a declaration of war. It is a test of leverage. Within the next 12 months, expect a coordinated logic bomb to detonate within the operational software of a primary U.S. West Coast container port. Simultaneously, a minor physical disruption, a microdrone swarm disabling a single, non-critical substation, will trigger a cascading blackout. The event will be attributed to a software update failure or a sophisticated non-state actor. It is a calibration shot, engineered to be attribution impossible. Its sole purpose is to measure the precise decay of American conventional deterrence and its remaining distance to the launch-on warning threshold.